Have you ever wondered if your childhood memories could hold a secret darker than you ever imagined? Today, we're exploring the chilling tale of My Childhood Home is Haunted. Get ready for a suspenseful journey through fear and discovery. And before we dive in, hit that subscribe button to stay connected with more spine-tingling stories like this one. I hadn't set foot in my childhood home for over 10 years. After my parents passed, the house was left to me, but I couldn't bring myself to go back. Something about that place never felt right. Even when I was a kid, the creaks in the floorboards, the way shadows seemed to move on their own, and the cold spots that would suddenly chill my spine, it was all too much. But last month, I got a call from a realtor. The house had been sitting empty, and they urged me to either sell it or risk it falling into disrepair. I finally decided to face my fears. I told myself it was just an old house with too many childhood fears tied to it. Nothing more. The first time I walked through the front door again, a wave of nostalgia hit me. The old wooden floors still groaned underfoot, and the smell of aged wood and mothballs lingered in the air. But as I stood in the foyer, a sense of unease began to creep in. It was subtle at first, a feeling of being watched, of not being alone. I brushed it off. "You're just being paranoid," I muttered to myself. I spent the afternoon clearing out boxes from the living room. Dust coated everything, and the silence was oppressive. That's when I heard it, faint footsteps coming from upstairs. My breath hitched. No one else was supposed to be here. "Hello," I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. No answer. I grabbed a heavy flashlight from the kitchen and made my way up the creaky staircase. Each step felt like it took an eternity. When I reached the top, the hallway stretched before me, just as I remembered it. The doors to the bedrooms were closed, but one, the door to my old room, was slightly ajar. My heart raced as I pushed it open. The room was empty, but something felt wrong. The air was heavy, and a faint smell of decay lingered. The wallpaper had started to peel, and the bed was still there, covered in a layer of dust. But then I noticed something that stopped me cold. Words scratched into the wooden floor. They read, "Leave while you can." I stumbled back, my flashlight shaking in my hand. My logical brain told me it had to be a prank, something left by a squatter or a previous visitor. But deep down I knew better. The words were fresh, the edges of the scratches clean and sharp. That night, I decided to stay in the house. I told myself it was to prove that I wasn't scared, but the truth was, I didn't want to leave the house unattended. Something about the scratches on the floor made me feel like I needed to be there, like leaving would make things worse. As darkness fell, the house seemed to come alive. The creaks and groans of the old wood grew louder, and the cold spots became more frequent. I tried to sleep, but a constant feeling of unease kept me tossing and turning. Around 2 a.m., I heard it again, footsteps. But this time, they were louder, heavier, and unmistakable. They weren't coming from upstairs. They were coming down the hallway outside the room where I slept. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. Slowly, I reached for the flashlight on the nightstand. My hand shook as I clicked it on and pointed it at the door. It was slightly ajar, just enough to see into the hallway. And then I saw it. A shadow moved past the crack in the door. It wasn't the shadow of a person. It was too tall, too misshapen. My breath caught, and I held still, praying it wouldn't come in. But the door creaked open wider, and I felt the air grow colder. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The shadow didn't answer. Instead, it seemed to dissolve into the floor, leaving only silence behind. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I decided to dig into the history of the house. I went to the local library and searched through old records and newspapers. What I found chilled me to the core. In the 1940s, a man named Charles Whitmore had lived in the house with his family. According to the articles, he had become increasingly paranoid, convinced that something evil was in the house. One night, He set fire to the basement, claiming he was trying to destroy whatever was haunting them. The fire killed him and his family, and the house was rebuilt years later. I realized the basement, the only part of the house I hadn't explored, might hold the answers I needed. That evening, I opened the basement door, which groaned loudly on its hinges. A wave of cold air hit me as I descended the stairs, flashlight in hand. The basement was unfinished, with dirt floors and stone walls. It smelled of mildew and something metallic, like old blood. As I scanned the room, my light fell on something carved into one of the walls. Strange symbols I didn't recognize. They looked ancient, like something out of a ritual. Suddenly, the air grew colder, and my flashlight began to flicker. A low growl echoed through the basement, followed by a voice, a deep, guttural whisper that said, "Leave or stay forever." I bolted up the stairs, slamming the door behind me. My mind raced. Was the house truly haunted? Or was I losing my grip on reality? I couldn't stay there another night. But something inside me felt tied to the house, like it wouldn't let me leave. That night, I stayed at a motel, trying to convince myself that it was all in my head. But around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. I picked it up and saw a text from an unknown number. It read, "You can't run from us." Attached was a photo of my childhood home, taken from the front yard. I rushed back to the house the next day, determined to end this once and for all. Armed with salt, sage, and a determination I didn't know I had, I went back into the basement. I spread the salt in a circle and began burning the sage, reciting every prayer I could remember. The growling started again, louder this time. Shadows moved along the walls, and the symbols began to glow faintly. A figure emerged from the darkness, a twisted, monstrous shape with hollow eyes and long, clawed fingers. It screamed, a sound that seemed to shake the entire house. I held my ground, continuing the ritual. "You don't belong here," I shouted. "Leave this place." The figure lunged at me, but as it crossed the salt circle, it recoiled, its form dissolving into smoke. The symbols on the walls faded, and the air grew still. For the first time since I'd returned, the house felt quiet. I sold the house a week later. Whatever had haunted it was gone, but I couldn't bear to stay there. As I drove away for the last time, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The house stood silent, its windows dark. But for a moment, I thought I saw a shadow move across the porch. Even now, I can't be sure if the house was truly cleansed or if it's just waiting for its next victim. One thing I do know, some places are better left in the past. If this story sent chills down your spine, make sure to subscribe for more tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. And remember, sometimes the past is best left undisturbed. Sweet dreams.